And right now we have one spreadsheet and it's called our calendar. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another spreadsheet. So I'm going to do that by just clicking this little plus thing down here at the bottom with a circle around it. And that creates another spreadsheet. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this spreadsheet. And I'm going to call this table because the data that we are representing in this calendar is more kind of in a graphical representation. So a lot of my landscape folks probably like this. A lot of my regional community planners are probably more text, more analysis-based type people. So we're going to kind of make something more geared in that direction over here on this side. And I also want to make another table here. So I'm going to create another sheet. And I'm going to rename this as well. And I'm going to call this hours. And what this sheet is going to represent is basically the number of hours in a day, or the number of hours that we're going to represent in this table. And I will kind of explain this a little bit more later why we're doing this, but for now I'm just going to leave it as that. And maybe I want to change my tab color as well. Maybe I'll make this one purple. And maybe I'll make this one blue. So now when I switch back and forth, my calendar's red, my table's blue, and my hours, or my table's purple, my hours are blue. So in here, my very first column, these are going to be the events that occur throughout my day. And what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to grab these little major events here and I'm going to list them here in my table. And I'm not going to list them just in any old way. I'm going to list them kind of strategically. So the first set of events I'm going to list are going to be related to healthy living. So what I might do, yeah, I'll just leave it like that for now, and I'll start here on this side here, and I'll probably end up merging these two cells together, but we'll see what happens. So sleep is a healthy living event. Exercise, hygiene, meals, food prep. It's going to abbreviate food prep, groceries, laundry, and some of you may group this up as house chores. And the last one is socializing. And then in this column here, this is going to represent the hours. So I'm going to just do HRS for short for hours. And what I could do is just write hours in here repetitiously over and over and over, and that'll probably develop me carpal tunnel syndrome over a certain amount of time doing this repetitious task. So what might be easier, there's several ways I can do this. I can do a Control C, Control V on the keyboard, and that will copy it. Another thing that I can do is, if you notice, there's a little square here in the corner of this cell. And it's unique, because if you look at the other corners of the cell, it doesn't have a square like that. Only this corner here has a square. And what this allows us to do is to copy the formula or the contents of this cell to other cells. So if I grab it by here, so if you notice my cursor changes when I go to a side of this square, the side of this rectangle. But if I go to the corner of this rectangle where there is a square, if I go to any other corner, it doesn't do that. So if I go to this corner here, it becomes a plus symbol. So if I click and drag, I can have the contents of that particular cell replicate itself over other cells. And for now, I'm going to leave this part here blank. So all of this here, this is related to healthy living, and what I'll do is I'll just merge and center these cells together, and I'll just call this healthy living. And the other thing I might want to do is maybe I might want to change the orientation of this text. And what I did was I just right click here and went to Format Cells. And I'll probably go to Alignment, and maybe I'll change it so that it points upwards. And maybe I want this to be bold. And maybe I'll want to change the font of this whole thing so it's consistent with my other work here that I've done. Maybe I'll make all of this Arial narrow. There we go. Maybe I'll drag this so it's a little bit closer. And I probably want it to be centered this way as well, so I'm going to click this box up here. And then up here I'll probably merge all of these together too. Why not? So these are my events, and maybe this event has a little bit more hierarchy than my other one, so maybe I'll make this one a 14 size font. Maybe this one over here becomes a 12. And maybe these here, we'll just leave them at 11. 11 should be just fine. Alright, so this is a little bit different from what we've been doing over here. And over here, this was very simple, very basic Excel. And we were kind of introduced a little bit to the ribbon interface up here. I mean, we didn't use too much of the stuff that was going on up here. We used some of the stuff that's in the Home tab. We used some stuff in here in the inserts. These are all things that you can insert into an Excel spreadsheet. We haven't really formatted our page layout too much. We kind of did a little bit of this when we went to go to print. We haven't done anything with formulas. In fact, we're going to get ready to do some things with formulas. And we haven't done anything with data. So these two tabs here are pretty powerful, and this is what makes Excel really unique. Because, you know, technically you can make this calendar in any program. In fact, it would probably be even better, and you can have a lot more creativity if we did this in Illustrator. The reason why we did it this way is just so we can kind of get a feel of how Excel works. So we haven't done anything with formulas, and we haven't done much with data. Review allows you to kind of mark up and start inking someone else's work for the purposes of getting it refined and cleaned up. And then we had our view, and we use a little bit of our views here for zooming in and zooming out. And we haven't really frozen any panes or anything like that. So let's do something with that really quick, just so that we can get that experience in. So let's just say we're looking at this table here, and we're scrolling down and up. And we're down here working, and for whatever reason, you know, we're zoomed all the way in, and we just really can't see what hour of the day this is or which day of the week it's in. So it'd be nice if these days of the week and these hours here could stay right put and not move around. So one thing that you can do is you can click here, and this is just right after where I want it to stay and right after where I want the records. The records are the things that are horizontals, and the columns are the things that are vertical. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click right here because I want the stuff that's above this point to stay put, and the stuff to the left of this point to stay put. And I'm going to go up here to freeze panes. I'm just going to click freeze pane. Now let's see what happens. If I scroll down, my Sunday through Saturday stays put. So that's what happens if we go left and right. If we go left and right, my 12 p.m. and all those things will stay put. So this is something that you might find useful as you progress through the landscape architecture and regional community planning program. So let's go back to our table over here. And I need to input a few more things in here, and I'm going to input things that are related to my work. So I'm going to put in tech mods. I'm going to put in tech mod preparation. The next one is committees, and I've kind of grouped a lot of things together to fall under the category of committees. And I'm also going to claim that commuting is also part of work, otherwise I would probably never leave my house if I didn't have to come to work. And I'm going to group all of these together again. So I'm going to go up here to the Home tab, my Home ribbon. These are called the ribbons up here at the top. I'm going to do Immersion Center, and I'm going to call this Work. Same procedure as before. I'm going to go in here and format this cell. I'm going to line it so that it's vertical. And then click OK. And I'll probably make this bold and center that one as well. And then I got a couple more things down here at the bottom. And this is going to be my coursework related to my PhD. And then study hours. So I've kind of grouped together my study and my research hours together. And I could technically go up here and do study/research. Which means I'll have to make this just a little bit more bigger. So again, I'm going to try to drag these down here. And then for this, I'm going to merge and center these. And this is a little bit hard because it's going to kind of spill over. And I'm going to just call this maybe school for short. Format cell, have that point up. Could call it academics, but it's a little bit longer word and it'll require more. We can already see that this is already requiring more space. So what I might do is just highlight all these, maybe make them all just a little bit bigger. There we go. And if I make it yet even bigger, I might be able to get the word academic to fit in here. There we go. Go ahead and center that. So up here I might want to indicate that these are actually weekly events not really daily events, because we're calculating the amount of sleep that we get in a week. So the next thing that I could do is go in here and basically add up all of these values, how many hours I'm going to spend each week on sleep, and manually input the numbers here. And that's probably the quickest way to do this, but we're going to kind of do this a little bit longer way. And the reason why we're going to do that is so in the event that you have to do something that isn't as quick and easy as this, it might take an actual long time, or you may end up having someone else who has to input the data, and you want to make sure that the data that gets inputted here is going to be valid data. So for example, if you're working on a really large spreadsheet for something that's really important, you want to make sure that the data that gets inputted in here is actual valid data. So over here I'm going to go to my hours spreadsheet, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to list here all of the possible answers that could go into this hours block over here. And what are the possible answers? Well, the possible answers are listed here. We kind of mentioned that we wanted this in 15-minute segments. So one possible answer, of course, is 0. And then from here it could be 0.5, 1, or 0.25, sorry. 0.5, 0.75, 1, 1.25, and of course, you know, we could go in here and we could manually type in 0.25, 0.5, and we can do this all the way down to a certain amount of number. Now the question is, how far do we want this to go down? Well, we already know just from looking at our sheet over here that the thing that's going to probably take the longest duration of time will be sleep. And there are 7 days in a week, so I'm going to do so to do a formula, you just press the equal sign, and as soon as you do that, Excel automatically knows, okay, they're getting ready to put in a formula because they started this cell with an equal sign. So I'm going to type in the number 7 times, and then I'm going to type in the number 8, assuming that we're going to get 8 hours of sleep each day. So our max value here is going to be 56. So instead of typing these in one by one, what I'm doing is I'm just going to delete these two out, get the first one started, and in this cell, again, I'm going to do another formula. I'm going to do equal, and I want it to take the cell above it plus 0.25, and then I'm going to press enter, and it makes that 0.25. Now I want these other cells to have a similar formula. I want, for example, this cell A3 to take the cell above it and add 0.25. So if it does that, this answer should be 0.5. Now what I can do is hand jam the formula in each of these cells one by one, and of course that will even take longer than just, manually typing in what the numbers are. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to do that same thing that I did on the previous sheet, is I'm going to grab this little box here in the corner and I'm going to drag. I'm going to drag all the way down to however far I need, and I'm probably going to drag it down because 56 times 4 is going to be all the way down here somewhere. I went a little bit too far. I'm going to go up to here. I'm just going to delete these extra ones. I wasn't paying attention. And that's as far as I need. And we can see here that it went ahead, made the 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, 1, 1.25. So we didn't have to manually type that in at all. That went very, very fast. So I'm going to go up here and just delete that 56 since we really don't need that in here. So these are all the possible answers that can go in these cells here. And we want to make sure that whoever's operating our spreadsheet will use one of those possible answers and won't accidentally type in 4,000 or some letter in here and basically make the calculations invalid or create errors in the sheet. So in this first cell, I'm going to select it since this is where I want the data validation to occur. And I'm going to go up here to data, and I'm going to look for data validation. So I'm going to click this drop down under data validation, and I'm going to click data validation. And the first thing it's asking me is, what do I want to allow in that cell? And right now it's set to any value, and I don't want any value. I want it to use values that are going to come from a list. So I'm going to choose list. And then down here it's asking me, okay, what is the contents of that list, the source? So I'm going to click on this button over here. And we notice it says data validation, and right now it's blank because it doesn't know what the list is, but the list is actually already made. It's over here in hours. and it says equal hours exclamation point, and that basically means go to the hours spreadsheet. And now I'm just going to highlight all the possible answers that are going to be included in that list. And this can take a little while. I'm going to go all the way down to 56. There we go. Once I'm done, I'm just going to press enter on the keyboard. And now we notice that it's going to the type of data criteria that's going to be allowed, things that are coming from the list, and the contents of that list is located here. So I'm just going to click OK. And now we notice something different occurs here. We have a little drop-down box. So if I click on the drop-down box, these are all the possible answers that can occur inside of this cell. And what I want to have happen is for the same thing to happen in all of these cells here. So I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to copy this formula using the same procedure into all of these other cells. And now I'm going to go into this first one and actually input how many hours of sleep I calculated here. So according to my calendar over here, I'm just going to grab the values from here. I'm just going to add all of these up. I'm going to put them inside of here. This first one is a 56. And I decided I'm going to get 5 hours of exercise a week. For personal hygiene, I'm choosing 8. And these aren't random numbers, of course. This is just me going in here and adding up these values inside of here. So I have shower, that counts as personal hygiene. For meals, I'm saying that I'm probably going to eat 7 hours a week. Food preparation, I'm saying, is going to take 1 hour. Groceries is going to take 1.5 hours. Laundry is going to take me an hour to do. And I'm saying that worship is going to take 3. Socializing, that's basically my gaming time. It's 4.5. The amount of time that I'm going to spend in tech mod, I've calculated it out to be 9 hours. This is the amount of time I actually spend in the classroom teaching. Preparation time altogether calculated to be 24. Committees, I'm saying that I'm going to spend about 4 hours on committees. It's usually not a very factual number, ends up being a bit more. Commuting, about 7.5 hours. Of course, that's plus or minus depending upon the traffic. I always assume the worst case scenario. Saying that it's winter time and I have to scrape my windows or whatever, I want to also include that amount of time, and I have to drive slow so I don't end up in a ditch. I live out in the country, so it takes a little while for me to get to camp. It's actually quicker for me to get home. It's actually much quicker for me to get home than it takes for me to get to work. Alright, coursework, 5.5. And then study research time, I'm going to say that that's 30.5 hours. This is a mixture of research and study time. And I'm also saying that I'm going to use this also for office hours, in case anybody needs help. There's one more thing that I need down here, and this is my total, and I didn't include that here, so I'm just going to type in total here. And I'm going to do again another formula, so I'm going to press equal. Of course, I'm not going to run through my calculator and add all these up. I'm going to have Excel do this for me. So this is going to be a summation. And I'm going to backspace really quick. And you notice there's a lot of formulas here that you can use to apply in here. So there's more than just a simple sum. There's different kinds of sums that you can do. And of course, in order to know what each of these sums can do, I highly, highly recommend using the Help menu. You can just go up here to Help. And right now I don't have internet connectivity at home. But if you had internet connectivity, you can go out and it'll explain to you what each of these formulas mean and what it will do. It'll even give you examples of how to use it and what the possible outputs might be. So it's very, very useful. So I'm going to do sum, and now it's saying number 1, number 2, number 3, etc. So it wants me to input the numbers that we want Excel to add up. So I'm going to go up here, I'm just going to click and select all the numbers I want it to add up. So there it goes, C2 through C16. So this is also something important to pay attention to. So in case you have to list a series of numbers, instead of doing it like the example shows down here, number 1, comma, number 2, comma, this is another way to create a list of numbers. You can do from C2 colon to C16, which means the same thing as numbers 1, comma, number 2. And this is a great way to learn Excel, just to see how Excel creates its own syntax, just from example. Okay, I'm going to press enter there. And this comes out to be 167.5. So again, I want those hours to copy down there, and I want probably the cell width to be the same. So I need it to be 31.5. So I'm just going to drag this down to 31.5 manually. Probably 31.5. There we go. And another thing that might be really helpful is if we could somehow, I mean, we pretty much know that this means healthy living, and this means work, and this means academics, and this is our total. If there was a way to just visually, very quickly, be able to see that this is quite different. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to highlight all of these. I'm going to go to home, and I'm going to give these cells a particular color. So maybe I'll fill this with a purple color. Maybe a lighter purple. Maybe I'll just choose that one. I'll go to more colors and see what my options are here. So I want to choose purple. Maybe I'll choose that purple. And then for work, maybe I'll make these blue. Maybe that blue will work just fine. And then for academics, maybe I'll choose green. And then for my total down here, maybe I'll just make this kind of a reddish color. There we go. So the next thing that I need to do now is I need to kind of total things up. So down here for visual purposes, I'm going to experiment here. Maybe I'll merge and center those. Maybe I'll move this over to the left. Maybe I'll bold that. Actually, I'm just going to do an undo and just leave it the way that it was. Alright, so over here on the right side of this table, I'm going to start creating a summary of events. So I'm going to call this summary of events. And this very first one, this is going to be my healthy living. And maybe the second one is going to be my work. Third one is my academics. And this last one is my total. And basically what I want to do here is I want to add up my healthy living hours and have a value here, add up my work hours and have a value here. Same thing with academics, and basically transfer my total up here. So for healthy living, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to create another formula, so I'm going to do an equals. As soon as I do equal, Excel automatically knows, okay, she's going to create some sort of formula here. And I'm going to do another summation. And I'm just going to add all of these up. And by having all of these as formulas, it's really, really great. And later we'll explore why that is. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Add all those. And then academics. So sum. When I type in sum, it automatically knows that I'm going to use some sort of sum function within Excel. When I do a bracket, that's the start of an argument, start of basically the program, the information that's going to go in. So I'm going to do these two, and then as soon as I put in a closing bracket, it knows that it's the end of that. Hit enter, and then my total, I'm just going to do an equal. I don't need to do sum because it's already added up. I'm just going to click here and just say that that cell will just equal that cell. Alright, so what I'll do up here is I'll merge these two together, just like I've done before. And maybe I'll make this a bold, and maybe I'll make that a 14 as well, so we're consistent with this over here. Then over here in this column, what I kind of want to have is my percentage. I'm I'm going to call this percentages. And in my percentages, what I kind of want to have is the percent of this out of a total realistic day. So how many hours is there in a typical week? So over here I'm going to do some quick math. I'm going to do an equal sign. There are 7 days in a week times 24 hours in a day. Press enter. There's 168 hours in a normal week. So I'm going to take this first value, I'm going to do equal again, 87, divided by 168. Going to do the same thing for this one. Instead, I'm just going to drag. And then down here for this bottom one, what we want to know is this value realistic? Is this value that we plan on spending is 167.5 realistic? Well, before we do that, let's go ahead and format these cells here. And what I would really like to have these cells to be is in percentage. Because right now up here at the top we said we wanted this to be in percentages. I'm going to actually make that go to the right like the rest of these. So I'm going to highlight all of this because this data type needs to be in percentages, and right now it doesn't see that that is a percent. I mean, we've written up here percentages, but the computer doesn't know that these values actually represent a percentage. It thinks it's some sort of division operation that was occurred here, and it doesn't know that these are actually supposed to represent percentages. So to tell Excel that these are percentages, I'm just going to highlight all three of these and right click and go to Format Cells. I'm going to go to Number, and right now it just says that it's general. Has no specific number format, and we're going to say Excel, this is a percentage, and we want it to be 2 decimal place accuracy, and then click OK. And it goes ahead and it puts its percentage signs in there, which is kind of very handy. So down here in this cell, what I want to know is what we've calculated out here, is this realistic? So over here I'm going to press space first, and then do a couple of these little symbols here. And this is more for graphics, and I want to ask myself, is this realistic? And to determine if this is realistic, we need to know, is 167.5 greater than or less than 168? So again, we're going to do another formula, and this is going to be a little different formula. This is going to be called a conditional statement, and this is like an if-else type statement. So before I even start doing that, let me just try to explain a little bit what that means. So we're going to have some sort of condition here, some sort of question, and it's going to result out in 2 possible scenarios. And there could even be a third one, so I'll just draw a third one out here. So one possible scenario, this is this one here. Maybe I'll just call this, the answer comes out to be yes. The second possible scenario is the answer comes out to be no, depending upon whatever the question is. So this one, just comes out to be a no. And then of course this third possible scenario is an error. Whatever got inputted there is not correct. But we're not going to take errors under consideration. We're just going to focus on these 2 possible scenarios that will come out. So in our given example here, we're trying to determine, is 167.5 greater or less than 168? So one possible answer is going to be, so the first question we're going to ask, is 167.5 greater than 168? That's going to be our question. And if it is greater than 168, then we're going to say that it is unrealistic. So our first response is yes. Our first possible scenario is yes, and the result of yes is that our schedule is unrealistic. If it's less than 168, then the answer to it being greater than 168 is no, and our result is going to be that our strategy here is realistic. So how do we tell Excel that? How do we get Excel to ask a question like that and create some sort of output? So we're going to use what's called an if-else statement. So we're going to type an equal sign here, and we're going to type in if. And now we need to have some sort of logic test. This is our question. And our question is what would occur in this box up here. So our question is going to be, is 167.5 greater than 168. So that is our test, because if it's greater than 168, then obviously our schedule is unrealistic. So I'm going to type in a comma here. So now we're on the second part. So what happens if it's true? What do you want to occur in this cell if 167.5 is greater than 168? Well, we're gonna have some sort of text statement in there. So to do a text statement in Excel, it's called a string. And if you're going to create a string, you have to tell Excel that this is a string. Otherwise, if you just start typing things in there, it's going to be looking for a variable. So for example, if I type in the word unrealistic, see, notice how it's looking for some sort of function, some sort of code. It's going to error out because unrealistic, the word unrealistic, doesn't exist as a function in Excel. We just want this to be text. So to have it just be text, we just use a couple of these little brackets here. So this is what happens if 167.5 is greater than 168. So if it is greater, then the answer would be yes, and the output is going to be unrealistic. So what happens if the value is false? Well, if it's less than 168, it's obviously a realistic schedule, but it can also equal 168. So again, we're going to do another set of brackets here, and we're going to type in realistic. Once we're done, we press enter, and we can see that it reads realistic. So one question that you might have is, how do you know which way that these brackets should go? Should it go this way or the other way? Well, one thing to take under consideration is what I had mentioned before. It can be realistic if it is less than 168 or equal to 168. So taking that under consideration, we may want to reverse these bracket directions and go less than and then use an equal symbol instead. So for now I'm going to leave it like that and press enter. And we can see, because we kind of reverse the logic, it's now saying that it's realistic. And all we need to do now is just switch this around. Make that a capital R. And that switches it around for us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of justify this to the right side, make it consistent with these other values over here. And one thing that we need to do is we kind of need to test and play with this. But before we test and play with this, let's do a little bit more formatting to make this table a little bit more readable. So this healthy living up here, I'm going to make this purple as well. This work, I'm going to make this blue so it matches up with the other one. And for academics, I'm going to make this green so it matches up with that one. And then this total value thing here, I'm going to make it consistent with our red color down there at the bottom. And then this value here, this is kind of like our test. So maybe I'll just go ahead and make it the same color as well. One other thing that I want this to do is, if it's realistic, I would like the font here to be kind of a bold green. And if it's unrealistic, I want it to be a bold red. So that's called conditional formatting. So up here at the top in the Home tab, what we want to do is kind of conditionally format this cell depending upon its output. So I'm going to click on Conditional Formatting. I'm going to create a new role. And I'm going to use a formula to determine which cells to format. So this is kind of the tricky part, and people often forget this, but you have to click inside of here, because by default the cursor's not in there. So click inside this box right here, and then click on the cell that you want to run the test on. So I want to run it on this cell right here. So it's going to look inside that cell, and it says format values where this formula is true. So we're going to say if it equals realistic, then we want the text to look a certain way. So I'm going to go over here to Format. And what I want my text to be is I want it to be bold. And let's see, I want it to be a kind of a dark green color. Let's pretty close there. Maybe we can go with this dark green here. Click OK and click OK. And there we go. So when it's unrealistic, we want it to be kind of a dark red. So I'm going to do the same thing. Go to Conditional Formatting. I'm going to create another new rule for the same cell. Use this last one. Make sure my cursor is inside of here. And then click on that cell, and if it equals, remember we got to use two double brackets up there, unrealistic. I want this to come out to be a pretty bold red color. I want it to stand out. Alright, so we don't know if this really worked or not, and one way to tell if it worked is we're going to have to kind of play with our calendar here a little bit. So let's just say that I decide to enroll in more than 5.5 worth of work here. I'm a PhD student, so let's just say I decide to go from being half-time here and I want to go full-time, and for a PhD student that's 9 credit hours. As soon as I change this to 9 credit hours, we immediately see that these values up here are automatically changed because it was based on a formula. And this is one of the strengths of Excel. Instead of having to hand jam in these additions, if you use a formula, it dynamically updates it on the fly. And we see that these percentages are also changed. So let me just change it back to 4.5 and just focus on the summary of events and percentages up here at the top. Change it back to 4.5 and what happens? We can see that the academic values change. So let's change it back to 17. Say I decide to enroll, I'll choose 9 instead of 17. As soon as I choose 9, it determines that 171 hours is just unrealistic. So let's see what happens if we change it to 5. Let's go back to 4.5 really quick. We can see that it's realistic because it's 166.5. Let's see what happens if I choose 5. It becomes 167. What happens if I choose 5.5? 167.5. That's still less than or equal to 168. Well, what happens if I change it to 6? That becomes a 168. So 168 equals 168. That would be topping off the possible amount of hours that there are in a week, so that's still realistic. So what happens if we go to 6.25? So if I enroll in more than 6.25 hours, it's just too unrealistic for me. There's not enough hours in the week for me to pull this off. So you're probably wondering, why do I have this 167.5? Why am I missing a half hour here? Well, I did this on purpose. If I go to my calendar, let me delete my sketch here. There's a half hour of time here that I didn't compensate for. And I did that on purpose just so that we could see the accuracy of our calculations here. So there's a few other things that we can do to make this table a little bit more readable. So maybe up here where it says summary of events and then percentages all by itself, maybe I'll just make it all as one huge thing, just for simplicity. So I'm going to call this summary of events and percentages. And maybe it won't be immediately apparent what these 87, 44, and 36s mean, so maybe in here somewhere we need to insert some units. I'm going to do an insert here. And I'm going to type in hours per week. Hours per week. I'm not doing a copy and paste because I don't want to lose my colors here. Maybe WK might actually work better. So let me get rid of those 2 extra E's in there. We've already abbreviated hours. Technically, if we have an abbreviation, we might want to put a period in there somewhere to even further minimize confusion. Probably should do the same thing here. Probably going to do it for 1. Drag and drop. And drag and drop that one. And then for this one, same thing. There we go. Maybe something else we can do here is we can add a colon. Just little minor details here that might help make this just a little bit more readable. And maybe if I had an arrow that pointed to here, that might help too. Maybe it'll work, maybe not. Everybody's different. So you're free to experiment and try different things. So I'm going to try making one of these. I'm going to do the very bottom one first. And I'm going to warn you right now, Excel's not very good at doing this sort of thing. This is something that if you want to make arrows and stuff, you really should be using Illustrator. For the purposes of this demo, we're just going to play around with this just a little bit just to get that experience in. I'm going to click here and then press my Shift key so that arrow is perfectly horizontal. Do the same thing. What I might do, just copy and paste this one, Control C, Control V, and maybe not move it, maybe do it this way. Notice here on the end it's not perfectly clean. That's fine. We're not going to get it perfectly clean, realistically. Have it come to the halfway point on that one. Drag this line down. Another line that comes across here. Without pressing the Shift key, it could go up and down. If I press Shift, it locks it in the horizontal. I think it does like 0, 45, 90 degrees. Locks it in those hard angles. I'm going to make 2 more of these. So there's my arrows, and one thing that I noticed is maybe I want this realistic text color to be a little bit more brighter green, so I'm going to actually edit this rule. So I'm going to go up here, click Manage Rules, and I want this green to be just a little bit darker green. Brighter green, I should say. There we go. There. So that darker green just doesn't really stand out. Alright, so back to over here, I need to format these lines, so I'm just going to select on one, right click, and choose Format Shape. And over here on the right side, these are all the things that I can do to this shape, all the things that I can format. And what I want to do is change the color. So I want it to match that kind of red color that I have going on. Maybe I'll choose something a little bit darker so the line can actually be seen, but at the same time not take away from the rest of our diagram here. Going to do the same thing for our green one over here. I'm going to choose a little bit darker maybe that middle color, so we can actually see where the line is at. Another middle color for that one. And for this blue one, choose mid color for that as well. And then for this purple one, I might stick with that same color purple since it's pretty dark anyway. The same thing up here for that purple. So what I might do is maybe make this a little bit more readable, might play around with this a little bit more. So maybe up here at the top, I'll try to do maybe a figure ground type thing, reverse this where this is black and this part is white. Maybe that stands out a little bit better. Then over here where it says healthy living, what I might do is maybe make this cell a little bit more darker. So maybe I'll choose a darker color purple, so I'll move up on the color scale here, maybe to that color, and maybe change the text to white. And then for work, I might do the same thing, maybe make it a darker blue. And then for academics, I might do the same thing, just to see how this looks. I may not like it, I may change it back. This is just totally for experimentation. And then I might break this and not make it a single cell. Just for the purposes of consistency, I might do something a little bit darker there as well. So where are we on our color palette here? This is about a reddish color, maybe that color. There we go. And maybe here we want to do the same thing. Academics, just trying to make it just a little bit more interesting. Of course, you're free to do whatever you want to do with yours. Use your own color palette. You don't have to use mine. Certainly, you don't have to use mine. And then we have our purple here. And maybe this part here I need to make bold so the text stands out. It's a little bit better, a little bit more space in between there. Definitely play around with the spacing of your stuff. Go in a little bit. There we go. The last thing I want to do is a print preview, so I'm going to try to print this as a PDF just to see what it looks like. This is a test print. I'm just going to save it to my desktop. I'll delete it later. That looks pretty decent in my opinion. Looks pretty good. And it spills over to the page too. And I don't want it to do that, so I'm going to do another print. And down here I'll probably do to fit on one sheet. It's a little bit more smaller. Maybe I'll choose landscape, because that's what I'm ultimately going to have when I'm all done. It's going to be a landscape orientation. I'm going to hit print, save it to the same spot, and there it goes.